What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to talk to you and show you a few things about repairing the common power steering fluid leaks on these BMWs. To start with, I'm going to mention the honorary O-ring that goes in the cap. I've already replaced the O-ring on my cap, but if you have not yet replaced the O-ring on yours, I would do that before doing anything else. What I'm going to be doing today is replacing both of these reservoir hoses. This hose goes from the power steering pump to the reservoir, and this hose here goes from the reservoir to the power steering cooler. So I'm going to start by going up underneath the car and loosening the line at the pump. So the first line I'm going to remove is right here. This is the hose that goes from the reservoir to the pump, and as you can see, it's leaking a pretty significant amount. I'm going to use a 6mm on this worm clamp. You could use a flathead, but I like using the sockets when possible. I did put a cap over this just to keep dirt or debris from going into the pump. So with the car back on the ground and with the catch pan underneath it, I can now work on the next connection, which is going to be right up here. Now at this point there are two hoses that go into the cooler. The top one, that's a hose that comes from the rack, and the bottom hose is the one I'm changing. That's the one that is coming from the reservoir. So in order to get these out, use a 13mm wrench and you just loosen this bolt here. We're only replacing one of these lines, but I'm gonna have to pull both of them out. And so I'm gonna change the O-ring on the line that I'm not replacing. If I do not change the O-ring, then there's a risk that I'll create a leak just from removing and reinstalling an old O-ring. So I've got the bolt removed all the way, and as you can see, these two lines are just sitting in place. I can pull them both out. I'm going to angle the lines downwards so that they can pour into the catch pan. And if you look, the bottom line can just come out of the collar. The collar is permanently a part of this upper line. I'm going to kind of move that out of the way. So there's that hose. That hose is free. And here's the bottom hose. I can kind of pull this up. So both of my hoses are free now. So now what I must do is remove the two bolts that retain the reservoir. In my case, I'm missing one of the bolts, but your car should have two bolts, and that's a 13mm. So here it is, and you can see where both of these lines were leaking. My new hose was slightly longer than my old hose, so I used this to trim it a little shorter. This thing works great. I've got my new hoses installed, and I've got the clamps on, but they're not so tight that I can't move them around, and I can move the hose around too, so I can get the angle just right. And if you notice, I've also oriented the clamps so that they're going to be easy for me to get to once it's installed. I'm just going to throw it up in here. There we go. I'm not going to bolt this down yet, I'm just going to get it situated. And before I install this here, I mentioned changing the O-ring. So I'm going to pull off the old O-ring, and my new line, one of the new lines came with the new O-ring here, and I think it'll fit. Yep, looks good. I'm going to pop the cap off. The collar clicks on over this. Should. In most cases, this collar should just click over the new line. But I think what's happening here is, because this new line is aftermarket and it has like an anodized coating over it, it doesn't want to go on quite so smoothly. So make sure that both lines have O-rings before you install them. There we go. So this doesn't have to be super tight. It just has to be tight enough to, you know, lock everything in. So I've got the line connected up here. It's coming around. I might as well bolt this up. You can see this hose. This hose is oriented well. I'm going to go ahead and tighten that. It's got to be tight, but not overly so. And let's go ahead and get this vehicle up so I can do the bottom connection. Alright, so up under the car, I went ahead and put the clamp on the new hose, and I can pull off this cap.
What is that?
I'm gonna put a timing belt in it tonight.
Right here?
Yeah. So with the vehicle back down on the ground, I'm just checking the routing of the line. Everything looks great. So I'm gonna go ahead and tighten this clamp as well. So the next step is to add fluid, and you want to make sure that there's no leaks, and also important is to bleed all of the air out of the system. So the first couple of times you start it, you want to have the wheels off the ground. You want to be turning the wheel to from left to right to purge any air out. And don't have if you start to hear a noise, like a power steering pump whine, you want to turn the engine off soon. Got the fluid topped off. I've got it topped off with some transmission fluid. And I don't like to run it without this cap because I think it splashes everywhere.
Right here.